Welcome to Building Bridges. Thank you very much, Rhian and John, for joining this conversation. I think the idea of this dialogue is really to go in on the recent evolution of sustainable finance to see what needs to be done, where are the obstacles, but certainly foremost, where are the opportunities. The times where ESG was just starting and that was defined in making sure that some of the criteria were well taken into consideration in the investment decisions, such as nature impact, such as environmental impact, such as social impact. Is it really where sustainable finance has gone since then? I mean, we've now lived a number of years through specialization of some of the financial sector actors. Is this where sustainable finance has gone, and where do you see, and perhaps I will start with you, Secretary Kerry, what is the state of sustainable finance in your views today? Is it doing the right thing? Is it on the right course of action? And where do you see the main obstacles? Let's start with this type of approach and question.
Well, Patrick, first of all, it's great to be with you, and thank you for the privilege of doing this. There are multiple answers to that for the following reason. There are different attitudes in different parts of the world. In the United States, ESG has been weaponized. And many CEOs, many sustainability officers, others are struggling because promises that were made in the context of Paris, Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, and ultimately Dubai are not being kept. Those promises have dropped by the wayside because, frankly, a lot of money has been spent by powerful forces to distort the playing field. And the result is, and particularly in my country, in the United States, the administration has shown a willingness to play a kind of hardball that has no place in this kind of effort, which should be based on facts and on reasonableness. So people are scared. There are some people who are scared. And I've talked to good friends, big asset managers, well known to everybody, who tell me, well, we're going to continue to spend, we'll continue to invest, we're going to continue to keep our pledges, but we're just going to be more quiet about it. We're not going to make ourselves targets. That has slowed some things down. But on the other hand, I think we're now looking, I see a remarkable possibility for the transition to accelerate. And the witness to that is the fact that last year there was $2 trillion that was invested in renewable energy versus $1 trillion that went into fossil fuel. And it's very clear to me that what the Wall Street Journal wrote about a month ago, headline, "The energy transition is now unstoppable." So we're living in a very different and exciting atmosphere, I think.
And how do you view the situation from your eyes and efforts?
Well, I'd certainly build on the points that Secretary Kerry made. There's a bleak picture when it comes to maybe the attention economy. But when it comes to actual investment, what we're seeing is the politicization of prudent risk management that is in no one's best interest. But whether we see people who are already able to deploy capital, they see the opportunities. That 2.1 trillion that was spent last year, notwithstanding 40% of it was spent in China, but 90% of it was spent in really well-known mature sectors: renewable energy, electrified transport, energy storage, power grids, where we, as private sector financial actors, we understand those markets, we understand those business models. The bit that's exciting now is how do we get money into those first of a kind, early of a kind sectors where that are also going to be absolutely key to the transition.
Fostering innovation.
Exactly. Climate technology, earlier stage. And that's really where, when you're speaking to people, they're getting very excited about it. Private capital has always been looking to make risk-adjusted returns. That was the case even when we were in the buoyant days of the big target setting and the big tent initiatives. What I think we're seeing now is, with the green hushing and other stuff, is a real honesty, and that is not going to be compromised. For the time being, I think we may have lost the moral imperative argument a little here. That I think for what we're in such peril, that the climate crisis provides us with such peril, But one would have thought that financial institutions would be willing to look at this differently to other thematics. But that isn't the case for now. And therefore, we need to make sure that these opportunities are just as attractive as other thematics.
So what you're basically saying is that, in your view, the financial sector, if we just stop at the financial sector 1 second, is probably more credible in its application of sustainable investing processes than it was in the past. It is also more transparent and honest about the limits and the potential, isn't it?
I think there's always been credibility. I just think previously there may have been a little hope in the ambition. And now we're really focusing on finance fundamentals and making sure that, investments meet attractive risk-adjusted returns. And so it's our role to work with the policymakers to enable that situation and make sure that, we can create those investable opportunities.
Policymakers are ultimately elected, usually.
Well, some are. Not all. Some.
And if they are, the role of the communication in these sustainability-driven types of strategies is very, very important, because that's through this communication that the right politicians will probably be, when they are to be elected. Do you see this communication about what you just said sufficient today, or are we missing a link? I'm talking, for instance, about the fact that there are trade-offs, and the investors look at these trade-offs, and one of them, which is probably one of the most difficult, is the short versus long-term trade-off. And in the short trade-off, in the short term, it's very difficult to have the average investor admit that it might suffer because it has set long-term objectives. What communication, how should we communicate the interest of having sustainable strategies in our portfolios in a better way so that we get this right decision made?
Well, I think we have to change the narrative. And the narrative has gotten bogged down. It's been questioned and tarnished to some degree. Something as morally compelling as saving the planet, literally, as protecting the oceans or forests or so forth, given the scientific reality of the relationship of all these things, that importance has been diminished and tarnished under the label of wokeism or some other derogatory notion. So the people who are content with the status quo, because the revenue stream is great, that's what they've been doing for 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, in the case of fossil fuel, they're very content to not upset that status quo. And the truth is, it's not upsetting it. It's actually opening up a far better financial world, as well as a far better human, sort of personal world, in the sense that the economics make sense. The winner in this ultimately, which is true usually in the marketplace, is going to be, what do the consumers want? They want cheaper electricity. And the truth is, solar, wind, and storage beat gas, oil, coal. It just does, hands down, on the pricing of it. And that's without playing games with that pricing. So the more people begin to really, which is what's happening, slowly, faster in some places than in others, EVs penetrating the market faster and faster. China has manufactured and deployed more renewables than all of the rest of the world put together. What does that tell you? They know something. And we're the only country in the world whose president, of all prime ministers, presidents, finance ministers, environment ministers, kings, whatever, they haven't pulled out of Paris. Just the president of the United States has. So I think it's remarkably self-defeating. In one breath, you say, well, we want to compete with China. We want to be number one in the world. We're going to be number one in AI and so forth. But guess what? They walked away from the entire playing field. And so they say, oh, go ahead, China, you can own this. You can be the producer. It's insane to say you're going to be number one. You're going to strengthen your economy. You're going to build for the future and not be competing in all of these kinds of things. In addition to that, there's another big transition taking place simultaneously. You're very familiar with it, both of you. It's called AI. So you have energy transition and AI transition, and they really do come together in significant ways. So as people become more aware of that, and as those transformations are more and more penetrated in terms of the marketplace, we're going to get reduced some very simple arguments here. And that's where I'm shifting the narrative to. It's to the economics. You can make money. You can make more money. You can do much better.
Makes business sense.
Which is why I'm now executive co-chair of a fund called Galvanize with very seasoned investors. But we are focused on proving to the marketplace new technologies beat old commodities. That's the new rule. That's where we are. And I'm really excited about what's happening. I was just in New York at the Climate Week, and at the Bank of America, there was a meeting of King Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative. And all these leaders were stepping up there talking about, there was real talk about production of electricity that's going to come from fusion. When is the last time that conversation took place? So I see transformation coming at us, geothermal things. Everybody knows now that hydrogen is proven more complicated and difficult. That pricing isn't going to work. You look at the different possibilities. Price, I think, is going to determine luck. People will say, well, we've got to have the data centers. Have got to be serviced by major amount of power. That's true. Absolutely true. They take enormous draw of power. Well, guess what? If you're going to build a gas-fired combined cycle turbine, it's a 5 to 10 year wait. So if you're rushing to get into the market today, where are you going to go? Solar, wind, storage, and maybe some gas that's available as a transition tool. We're not against that. We think that's smart. It's going to be a transition. None of the efforts globally that we engaged in diplomatically have said this has to happen tomorrow. We all understand transition. That's what we called for in Dubai, a transition away from fossil fuel.
Is there, Rhian, a disconnect that you perceive between the ambition that are, that are created by what John has just explained, those opportunities, those new universes of investments that are rendered possible, those adaptations of economic model? Is there a disconnect between these ambitions and where capital is flowing?
I think we have seen that to an extent. But to build on the points that were being made, this is all about capturing the narrative, both for the electorate, but also for investors. There is one common thread, which is there is only one route to prosperity that is coherent with the science. Yeah. And that is exactly as Secretary Kerry has outlined. But the arguments are slightly different. So the arguments to consumers absolutely need to be rooted in their pocketbook. If this doesn't result in cheaper energy bills, if this doesn't result in better impact. I was learning recently about if you put solar panels on a school, it lowers the bills for the school, and then that additional capital can be invested in school books and teachers. Who wouldn't want that outcome? So these need to be genuine, real world outcomes that impact and make people's lives better. Some of those arguments might fall on slightly deaf ears when we're talking to investors, but there I do think the arguments around, the ability to make returns, but also the market stability argument. We talk a lot about fiduciary duty. We talk a lot less about market stability. And surely at this point, we have enough data to show that irresponsible lending, irresponsible investing is leading to extreme weather events that are having increasing impacts day to day, where we're seeing them impact the P&L of genuine companies, genuine investments. So this type of discussion, I just think, it's nuanced, but we need to continue it in order to marry, yes, that disconnect, that execution gap which we see sometimes between long-term, highly ambitious political statements and the reality of where's the investable pipeline for investors, for lenders. But this is not insurmountable. It just requires far better collaboration, sector by sector, specific policy enablers that create that opportunity for the finance to flow. I very much view, finance are the facilitators of this transition. The policymakers are the enablers. Yeah. Together we can make it happen, but we can't act in silos.
Could I just add quickly, I just want, listening to Rhian, in terms of consequences and responsible investing, et cetera, insurance companies are pulling out of Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, California, Texas. What does that tell you? That is someday soon going to have a major impact on the mortgage market. That's
What is not sustainable is not investable.
And then secondly, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars just cleaning up the mess after a storm, rather than building real adaptation or resilience or doing what's necessary for the long term. So there's the disclosure issue, which was a big deal a few years ago. We thought Gary Gensler would move and do something, decided not to. But that's important. People, I now have a fiduciary responsibility to people. You have to, if you know things or there are scientific facts staring you in the face, so liability will become a bigger issue as we go forward here. So, and the only other thing I mentioned is, in terms of, yes, the money and the new technologies matter, but we're forgetting about basic health of human beings. And we're forgetting about the impact of pollution. We don't talk about pollution very much, but guess what? Greenhouse gases are pollution, and they're killing people. We lose about 7 million people a year die because of the bad air quality. It's worse in some places than others, but anybody with a heart disease, emphysema, or with something, is affected by this. So we're opting not just for the good economics, not just for the good finance, we're opting for better health and security. I think those are the three touchstones now of the new narrative, that you have economics, they work. We're not asking anybody to sacrifice. We want an abundance of energy. No one will do with less. But guess what? It can be better energy, cleaner, safer for the long term, and that gives you these other positives.
The health point doesn't get made half of enough.
Half of them.
I mean, even back home in the UK, I think it costs our National Health Service something like £1.5 billion a year to treat people with respiratory illness because they're living in homes that aren't adequately heated. And again, that ability to retrofit homes, make them more energy efficient, lower bills, create the right supply chains, create construction jobs, etc. It's a win-win, but again requires policy to create demand and finance to create the financing products and solutions that can then service that demand.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just reacting, saying finance, is probably there. There are some gaps with regard to policies, indeed, that speak to the majority and make them really accept those policies. You have to invest to get those benefits from a health point of view or not. Don't you agree?
Yeah, fully agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a difficulty. From your, John, from your experience as a policymaker, what would you say would be or has already been the major trigger towards capital to flow in the right direction? What could it be if we're missing something? What has it been until here? If you saw an example of where it has been a good decision from a policy point of view.
Well, the major signal to date has been a combination of things. It's been the impact of storms, the realities to farmers, the destruction of crops, the fires, the mud, it's all related. And I think people who've taken time to think about it and learn about it understand that relationship. And that's one thing that's motivated people. The other thing is the basic science. This is not something Joe Biden or John Kerry or Barack Obama or somebody, this is not something we dreamt up. We listened to the best scientists in the world. And there used to be a time when governments responded to the input of those scientists. Well, we particularly had a certain group of people who just said, devil be damned, we're not going to listen, doesn't matter, I don't believe in that. So you hear that something that is proven to be real is somehow a hoax. If that's our political leadership for the future, we're in trouble. But I think what's happening now is people are beginning to really understand that there's something more behind this. The reality is that everything we're doing with respect to the forests, the oceans, climate, EVs, buildings, building codes, transportation. I mean, the CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world are all on board.
Including in the U.S., by the way.
Including in the U.S. I was about to say, we started something as when I was the envoy called the First Movers Coalition. We have the top 100 corporations in America, including Microsoft, Apple, Google, running through airlines, United Airlines, Delta, automobile manufacturers, Ford Motor Company, Volvo, Mercedes. They've all joined in saying, we're going to buy green now, even though it's more expensive, a little bit more expensive, in order to put a demand signal in the marketplace to accelerate the rate of transformation. That's a big deal. These guys aren't, they're listening to the reality that they understand physics, and they're going to respond to the physics of the problem, the biology, the chemistry. The reality is mathematics is telling us what we have to do.
How do we argue in periods such as the one we're living through now, which is made of exceptions in all respects, and which basically make us fear that they're not going to reach those targets that we've set ourselves by definition if we continue like this? Should we react? There's two ways, at least two ways. One is to say it's terrible, we have to correct immediately and go back on the right track. And the other one is to say nobody has ever said it would be linear. We have to accept deviations, make sure we keep course on the final objective, isn't it? How would you argue in this period where we know by definition that the conditions make us do something else than sustainable policy making all the time? Or investing all the time. We have to take into consideration the realities of geopolitics, the realities of scarcity of resources, the reality of poverty, etc., which not necessarily at all time call for massive investment in the direction we ultimately want to go. How do we argue about that? I mean, how do we explain, speaking of narrative, how do we argue about that?
A very peculiar feature of ESG investing over the last few years has been this expectation that it always beats the benchmark. That is not an expectation we have for any other thematic, any other asset class. We accept there are, as you say, geopolitical, there are always boulders in the stream. This is an unrealistic expectation from one particular investment theme. There is only one way that, this current situation that we're in, and we no need to sugarcoat it. It is challenging. It isn't where we were a few years ago certainly in terms of the rhetoric, but it will pass. And it will pass exactly for the points that you're making, Secretary Kerry, because the climate scientists' predictions are sadly starting to translate into real world, into the realities that we're seeing around us. And that is when people will increasingly say, we should be doing more, maybe more adaptation, yes, maybe more resilience, yes. But one argument, I think, with the investors, and we work a lot at the GFI with primary capital investors, so the banks, private equity, venture cap. When you speak to these guys, sometimes it's a bit like, well, we've looked at the scenarios of how carbon and climate were going to impact our returns, and we can weather them over the short term. But the thing that really makes them sit up and take notice is when you have things like the tragic floods in Valencia, where 200 people lost their lives, but also 3 billion euros lost in investment that needed to be, reinvested in order in that jurisdiction. And I remember speaking to some infrastructure investors at the time, said, we're just going to run the slide rule over some of our other infrastructure investments to see if they could be at risk. And it's like, duh. This is where we are. And so in terms of what do we say, I don't think we should be defeatist. I don't think we should be doom mongers. There are huge opportunities for investing in technology, in infrastructure. Those Galvanize figures were incredibly impressive. So there are opportunities for those who are willing to do the homework, and there are huge risks for those that are choosing to look the other way.
Can we just address the issue of the world in a wider aspect, meaning this transfer of capital that is needed from the global so-called north to the global so-called south? Is it really something that is still missing the key ingredient to make it possible, or are we simply underexploiting and perhaps not exercising our fiduciary duty, globally speaking, by not going in that direction? Are the conditions for more and more massive investment in some of those countries, which are the first to be affected by everything we're discussing? Are those conditions already existing, and are we simply not using them properly? If you ask the big asset owners of this world, they will probably all tell you they're interested in getting in this region. Or are there some missing points or missing policies or conditions that need to be realized? John?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who are missing the basic upsides. I mean, they're just totally misreading this. There are a lot of people doing that, number one. Number two, in most places now, you can put together deals that are completely wedded to an appropriate offtake, and it makes sense economically, and you can win in the marketplace. I think what we need is a little more leadership. I mean, that's the biggest missing ingredient. If we had the same multilateral momentum that we had as we went through the last COPs, when we did Paris, and then Paris to Glasgow, Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh, Sharm el-Sheikh to Dubai, Dubai, we came up with the strongest, best, in my judgment, mission statement that we've had the whole time, which is very simple paragraph. We must transition away from fossil fuel so as to reach our goal of net zero 2050, according to the science, that's the word, which means that 1.5 ought to be the target. And here's the key: accelerating in this decade. Biggest accelerator in the world? China. The rest of these guys have sort of backed off, and they're not doing what we do. So we need political leadership. We need corporate leadership. We need civil leadership. We need faith-based leadership. Pope Francis was spectacular on this. I visited with him a number of times, and he did Laudato Si, which was a very powerful encyclical calling on people to recognize the connection of human beings to as collective humanity to this man-made problem. And I think that we're on the brink. Honestly, I'm really confident sitting here, not made up, nothing blowing in smoke at anybody. The technologies are moving. The hard-working souls that are committed to this quietly are working. And things are happening. I see it. We're invested in a geothermal plant. The prototype was already built in Nevada. The pilot. Now that proved terrific. The prototype is being built in Utah. And I'm convinced we have new technology that is going to allow us to draw the heat, make the heat work the way it has historically, drive the turbines, and we'll have clean energy produced, clean outcomes. So I just see this happening in a lot of different fields. To hear I told you about the fusion thing. I mean, to hear serious financial folks and leaders on a podium in front of all their peers talking realistically about fusion power in the next 3, 4, 5 years or so. We're building in Massachusetts Commonwealth fusion. And I remember I worked on that as a senator. I got millions of dollars out of the U.S. federal government to put into that when it was just at MIT. Now it's out in the marketplace. Those are going to change the world, those things. UAE right now, an oil and gas producing country, is building out about 19 gigawatts of storage capacity while they have 4 new nuclear plants they've built and one of the largest solar fields in the world. Yeah. And they are hell-bent determined they're going to prove to the world you can have firm energy, which is, as we all know, what you need to be able to rely on a city, a community, a factory. You've got to have firm energy. But we can have it.
So the transition is irreversible. And I think this is really encouraging. Rhian,
I was just going to come back to your point about, what's missing for investors who express an interest maybe in some of the emerging markets, but as yet we're not seeing the capital flow. And I do think the answer to that is let's ask them the question. Let's work with them. So this is where I think building bridges is such a fantastic, clues in the title, right? It's bringing the different stakeholders together to say, on the whole, financial markets are smart. They put money where they can see the returns to be made. If the money isn't going to something that's already had so much political signaling, the question has to be, what is the barrier? What is stopping you from doing it? And sometimes it's perceived risk. Sometimes it's genuine risk around policy, currency, other issues that are genuine risks that might impact returns.
Well, Secretary Kerry, Rhian, thank you so much for these encouraging remarks. Thank you for being here at Building Bridges. We look forward to continue those discussions under the auspices.
Thank you for helping to build bridges.
Thank you very much for having me.